Niba kunle namdol shing yende gunge gemba bo simche gunge nye chekbo tamje kenla gun chanse omen jenge nge bodane dusum sanje gunge ngo ni simche go ngasuma denzebe zawe lame shabla so waile dambichu Yamsulembi Kulung Sangbo Tarba Topdeki Samba Nijung Tang Ani Rashin Simchen Tamche Ki Dendola Chudi Nyamlin Jigiyu Sambe Janshubke Simdang Timbe Koni Dambichu Yamsulembrishu
Let's start by engendering excellent motivation, thinking that I'm going to practice the sacred Dharma. I'm going to do that in order to obtain liberation, that wish that we call renunciation mind. And also, I'm going to put these teachings into practice in order to benefit oneself and all sentient beings, a thought that we call a mind of awakening, bodhicitta. So then, arousing renunciation and bodhicitta, in that spirit, please listen to the teachings.
Da Kanshi Shugarjavi Chudi Chachin Molam Dan Tevi Koni Lamgi Rimbati Dunsen Namba Sachin Namba Nganda Vichiki Tony Dordu Shugare Da Denani Kasang Tangbo Lamgi Tendi Shusini Azu Nipa Lam Dokjeki Shirab Namba Sumbuk Kola Shubikabre.
So in these Dharma sessions, we are at the moment looking at a very brief explanation of the 5 stages of a path, Buddhist path, in connection with the Mahamudra aspiration prayer. Among those 5 stages of a path, we have already finished explanation of the first one, which is the support that we all need in order to embark on the path. And we're still looking at the second stage of the path, the one that explains the 3 types of insight or wisdom that enables us to proceed on the path, that enables us to gain realization.
Shirab Namba Sumbudi Lam Toji Tsamshi Maimbar Ngaransu Da Lamgi Domshi Dawuj Tusam Komsum Sadi Lam Chazangi Domshi Dan Rimba Dawuji Cha Degi Yoba Indu Ani Doz Kasanda Duse Yunumbuji Kani Geba Dawuji Shue Gibizun Jebare.
This wisdom or insight, prajna in Sanskrit, it's not only what enables us to realize the path, but it also really serves as the framework of the whole Buddhist path. Because if we look at these 3 types of wisdom, right, they're connected with the 3 fundamental processes in the Buddha Dharma, that is the process of studying the Dharma, reflecting on the Dharma, and practicing the Dharma. And because that study, reflection, and meditation is really the kind of framework of the whole Buddhism, I have dedicated quite a large amount of time explaining those 3 types of wisdom, right? I went into a detailed, elaborate explanation exactly for this reason, because it's such a fundamental part of the Buddha Dharma.
다 디링 아니 가상 슈샤와 딘소기 뒤된다오지 사마리다오지는 주 dordu chugiins
Khenpo la di kesangi dzincha chikpo yana
sherap namba sumga kor
shirap sumgi las good. And in today's Dharma session, I would love to give a brief overview, kind of a summary, then of what we have learned about the 3 insights.
da khasang chawan nang la sumana shingi ngaranchu tharba matobar diberche bala yana neludi jishindu misagar dipni tulni dunga nyungore tini ta dibadila mishebi dibadang chik tesumgi dibadang ni tini tamadila tini jishin misabam mitokbegi dibadinde sumla tini dungaendang chubachasangdi 용거래 제자 다 등에디 레 드버체 발라 출바 데숨레 드고고 여바 인디 데네 데숨 메바 소에기 님보디 셔럽 넘버 숨긴 고림라 떼니 출바 넘버 숨보 암 디바 넘버 숨보디 빵니 데니 닐룩디 똑바디 랑줄라 깨비거니 등에디 세고 그래 세디다 된다 지당 주 도도다고 쉬바이나 시럽숨 세디기 고림당 그바다오디 된디스송여와 자원나 송원하시죠.
If we look at the root text, that is verse 5, right, the one that explains the 3 wisdoms, we will understand why do we have 3 wisdoms, why there is the specific sequence or order of the 3 wisdoms, and what is really the purpose of those, right? Just by looking at the 5th verse from the Mahamudra Inspiration Prayer. So there we can learn that really what the main reason, the main cause of our suffering, of our struggles in life, of our dissatisfaction is obscurations, plural, actually, veils that obscure the truth, reality as it is, when we don't clearly see, right, things as they really are. Right? We call that not seeing, that kind of veil, we call it obscurations. And as the text states, there are 3 types of obscuration. The one of first of all, it's obscuration of our ignorance, of not knowing. The second one is the veil obscuration of doubts. And lastly, it's obscuration of not seeing, not realizing the truth as it is. And really, if we think about this, all our problems, suffering, struggles, all of that, arise from these three types of obscurations. And so we, in order to break free this kind of vicious circle of suffering and struggles and difficulties in life, well, we need to clear away those obscurations. And the way to do that is by relying on the three antidotes. That is the three types of wisdom, the wisdoms that we will then gradually generate, right, in our mind stream. And in that way, they will gradually, one after another, clear away those three types of obscurations. So in this way, we can really summarize the purpose and the sequence of the three wisdoms.
당보 퇴비기 거니 랑귤랑 거와 직니 받지 되니 거와 니샤바디 거와 점도 마샤버지니 퇴비긴 된다라 삼바지 심귤라처 되니 심귤라 자리용도 태좀당 달베기 녀바지니 용거래 디 삼중기 시랍스기래 랑라 녀바녀샤베기 된다 대가기 낭라 냠버 샤니 균경문이 되니 니룩 세버지 똑바텔라 니 검중기 시랍스니 다 도스지는 검용도 검베심바 독수조고도 와.
In terms of the order of how do we really develop and gender these three types of wisdom, well, we start with the one that arises from studying or listening. And from that, from studying, from receiving the teachings, we gain understanding of the teachings. We call that intellectual understanding. What's important, not to leave our knowledge at that just mere intellectual, theoretical level, right? But to apply it then in our lives, to assimilate, integrate that understanding, that knowledge, to the point that we have absolutely no doubts about truth. All right, that kind of clarity that is completely devoid of doubts, that is the second type of wisdom, the one that comes from reflection or integration of the teachings in our life. And from that wisdom, then what we do, we take that certainty that we just have found, right, with reflection, with our integration of the teachings, and we rest in that certainty. We sustain that recognition of the natural state of phenomena as they are. So that resting and sustaining that continuum of recognition, that is the third wisdom, the one that arises from meditation. That's the process then of meditating or developing, cultivating, let's say, three types of insight.
단데 나라더니 고용 똑숨 세디 림바트 그거래 퇴비 셰럽 라테니 고와 삼중기 셰럽 라테니 용와 되니 검중기 셰럽 라테니 똑바스니 고와디 용와를 니규 용와디 똑바를 니규 용디 되니 다 셰럽 뇌암 람 뇌세디 랑귤레 기용거래 똑바딘 귤레 기용디
The three insights, three wisdoms, very much associated with the three processes that happen in our being, the ones that we call intellectual understanding, then experience, and realization. Right? This intellectual kind of understanding, knowledge, that what we gain, that's kind of the the result of developing, cultivating the first type of wisdom, the one that arises from listening, receiving the teachings. Experiential connection of the Dharma, experiential understanding, feeling of the Dharma comes from developing the second type of wisdom, the one that comes from reflection. And the stable realization, that's the outcome of the third wisdom. That's already a process of practicing or meditating. And so what has to happen, and absolutely, is that when we first gain that understanding, that kind of theoretical knowledge of the Dharma, we need to make sure that is transforms into experiential understanding of the Dharma. And that experiential understanding of the Dharma needs to be transformed, has to be transformed, into stable realization. Right? And once we have that stable realization, then we can say that's the actual prajna. That's the wisdom that we are seeking on the path.
Tene ta ge chumba chikdi mansu ta tangbo tebe sherap mdawachi nayo. Chik kanchung manchung irrelevant unnecessary information tene mangbo ngaransu yosu mese rwa kawa kasa ni tini tue shakwa ina yako yamare kangan yongsigires. Di indu da tueba siri tueba jesa ki ten rawachi kugo rwa jungsa rawachi tuebi sherabdi. Di indu da ngansu chue jekhen re nyamlen jekhen re mato ngansu je miyu shenpa yomare. Dinde indu inji minji susu tueba jesa ki resources yorwa material jawadi ani lungrik sungpa nashin chini da denyi la tenko go yosne sungpa re.
Another important note is when we are cultivating the three types of wisdom, when we start with the first one, the one that comes from listening or receiving the teaching, studying the Dharma, it's really important to watch out that we don't just overload ourselves with a lot of irrelevant, unnecessary information, because, well, that's what's happening all our lives. We get in all the information from everywhere now. But we need to remember that our main goal is the goal of a Dharma practitioner. And so what we are learning, what we are studying, has to be relevant to that goal of being a Dharma practitioner. And so we need to make sure what we are studying, those kind of resources, the material, right, has to be relevant to our path. And what is it? What's the material and resources? As the text states, that's the scriptures, scriptural statements, and reasonings.
Ta den nang la lung se laptu zodi sanje ki kadang de ki gongba del shabe ki tenju tenzu la kung tu ku gu re sini ti sungpa re. Teni rikpa se laptu ta chidang ki ngaransu ki common sense ki rikpa mangbo tenzu peche tangcho gu re. Kasange shubha nashin ngaransu la dewa dugu re, dunga dugu yo mare. Ani dewa dubar cheba la kare ki dewa gyu chigidu, kare ki dunga gyu chigidu. Lakbar do ngaransu semgi dedu dinsu, nyumong batan, dewa yoba dinsu, nguni re du mare du sini. Ngaransu common sense pecho tangba ina, dinsu yang rikpe ki chashi chire. Teni da chidang manzu nangshu ki shungni sheba nashin cheba ina teni yul ngongyur la ngonsum tseme ki rikpa tang yul kogyur la jeba tseme ki rikpa tenzu becho tang ni teni tuebi sherabdi ge gugu yore sini da tordu ina tuebi sherabdi 강중 마주 마인바 룽릭니라 땡고 그래서 되다 내가 지샤되기도 와.
Those resources, the materials that we need to rely on, take as our support in the process of studying. We need to also understand what are those. When we say scriptures, we refer to sutras, the words of the Buddha himself, and also to the treatises, the commentaries composed by the followers, the masters that followed the Buddha. When we say reasonings, this word reasonings, what it really means, well, as I have already mentioned in the previous Dharma sessions, we can really think that one part of this logic or reasoning is our just common sense that we all have to develop and rely on, such as if we really all agree that we want to be happy, we want to avoid suffering, pain, dissatisfaction, then we need to check what causes our happiness, what causes our suffering. We all can do that, right? And perhaps then we can check whether those states of genuine happiness and really suffering are connected to the states of our mind or to disturbing emotions and afflictions, right? Is there some correlation between disturbing afflicted states of mind and the level of our happiness and suffering? This we can all do, and that's common sense, right? And that's one part of what we call reasoning or kind of logic in the Buddha Dharma. Then, more technically speaking, right, if we go a little beyond common sense and more into the Buddhist way of explaining what is this so-called reasoning, then we say that we need to develop two types of valid cognition, kind of valid observations. The one that's direct one, that deals with the phenomena that are the objects of our sense faculties, the observable, what we can see, hear, and so on, right? That's the direct valid cognition. And also we need to develop the inferential valid cognition, the valid cognition that can infer to phenomena that are not directly observed by our sense faculties, right? Kind of hidden from sense faculties, but we can use signs and inferences to understand what are those really, what's the status of those phenomena, right? So when we have those two types of valid cognition on top of having just our common sense, then we can say, well, that's the wisdom, that's insight that comes from listening. Again, an important point, right? I cannot really emphasize it enough that this kind of an insight that comes from studying and listening is not just kind of being knowledgeable about all sorts of random, irrelevant things in life. Okay, here we specifically talk about what's relevant to our path to liberation. So.
Tene ta request ne lab yondu ta soso ki ji nangbe ki chema dan denjo la changba yena yakshore mena yang ta nangbe ki rikpe ki shiza tsawa fundamental basis ta wadi karres na tendel se dire riba karike ji sheba ine tuksati 다 땡들 세디 간주 초진이 선도나 뇨다 자오레데 초진이 선도 당바이나 대정그 뇨다 가요 말에 그봐 나라서 차사 땡들기 라왈레 마테바레 땡들기 강라 아니 펑션 지디게 봐서서 나라서 그 오퍼레이팅 시스템 데 코란 땡들 차디게 봐 인디 에 데이즈지 선도다나 남상 하고 또 그래 땡디 인디다 request labdi kachimbo samlo dangma tumne tendel se di lamsa ji samlo tang tu bai na shida ke nangbe ke rikpa ke ta neka daw te dila chang de la so so lai pendo chumbo yore practical en yore di ko theory kyang ba mai ba chin.
Another note about the reasonings. If we can study different types of valid cognition, Buddhist, right, epistemology, the way that we conceive of the world, that's great. That's the best if we can really delve into and do this kind of very elaborate studies of Buddhist logic. But if we cannot, that's all right. We shouldn't worry. What we need to, of course, always understand is the most fundamental root message of Buddhist logic, and that is that all phenomena are dependently originated, interdependence. Right? It all comes down to interdependence. All of the different types of Buddhist logic, well, cognition, really everything comes down back to the root, the fundamental message of the Buddha, dependent origination. On one hand, we can think, and it could appear to be a very complex topic, difficult to understand, but on another hand, it is not that complicated, really. It's straightforward. We all are bound by the kind of rules of dependent origination. We function within the operating system of dependent origination. If we think about this, we will see that very clearly. We understand it right away that, right, all we do is really all deeply interconnected. So if we cannot take up these kind of very extensive, elaborate studies of Buddhist reasoning and logic, that's fine. At the very least, I mean, not at the very least, sorry. Well, then what is important for everyone is definitely to have that fundamental, at the very least, fundamental knowledge of the dependent origination, and not just like as knowing as a mere theory, right? Oh, what is the main Buddhist view? Dependent origination, not just this kind of theory, but really it will help us, practically speaking. When we have that understanding, it will really guide us through our lives, not only as a mere theory, but practically it will be very helpful.
Chidang nangbe ki tawa ki shizatang tenchungin sungyo re. Ta tendre se di to zo chik kowa tsamchi mayimba nyongwa tiso leba ina teni rangshingi as a byproduct nyingche layang ke yonggenchi. Dega nangshingi ngaransu narrow minded diyan to zo chik open mind chadwechi. Ani lakbardu dak ji pe rigid ji yorwa track po jorwa dalsin de yang tini to zo ji da ji ma bolbo da wa chatwan de zam ji track po maimba tini ji namju ngaran su da kale khasho di ngarang samba de da nge thongwa ti ra demba yinsine ji uzu gyap de jorwa nganzu ina the personality do keje shebane mi khashe pe easy going ge opposite ji do ta di inchi gel karisi gen ha ma so teni ngaran su mi se na la ya to ji easy going segirwa di cha do gre di ne so so da na shin cha sa na ya bu do ba ganda ta mi se le hlecha ji le gre ba da tongni da tin su ko la ta le kyang yi tende samla tang to ba di ndu da tende de la shira ki ta nga zu ina multi nangbe ki yönde 내가 망보지 또 텐데 임바 하거나 되는 란신기야 모두 태용한 되는 그 뇌바 좀 보시는 거예요. 디인들이 라마딘족이 텐데라 삼로타 망보 순여래 산제긴 돈나라 야니 양도 순여래 아니 안수 남주 칸든 제베 값수다 내가 가르쳐 봐이네야 되니 탄낭한수 예달마 해도 빠빠와서는 텐데 닝보기 순난데서 칸든제 구단데서 나라 루 가엔다 디 기자 전부지 지게로와 산지 그 순간 닝부지 김센텐데라테니.
Indeed, the dependent origination, the truth of interdependence, is really the root of the Buddhist view, fundamental it's a foundation of the Buddhist view. And so it's really important not only to have the intellectual understanding of that truth, but some experiential, right, also knowledge of that truth of dependent origination. Because when we really have that experiential knowledge of dependent origination as a byproduct almost, we also will be more kind and compassionate. When we really understand deeply, kind of not just on the mere surface, but really from within our being, that everything is interdependent, we won't be narrow-minded, right? Or narrow-mindedness will turn into open-mindedness. Generally speaking, when we have a strong grasp of, to a self, grasping to this kind of me, well, we are quite rigid, tense, right? But that knowledge, experiential knowledge of interdependence, will make us softer. That rigidity of a self will melt. We will be much more open and soft, right? It's we can see that what's really difficult sometimes in life is that we all walk around insisting that my point of view is the correct one. I am right? So that's the opposite of being easygoing, which in English, Khenpo asks, what's the opposite of easygoing? I think it's being tense and being intolerant, right? That's the opposite of easygoing. So that's what we are, rigid, tense, intolerant. But once we really take it deeply to heart, that truth of interdependence will be much more easygoing, and it will help ourselves and it will help others around us. We'll be relaxed, we'll be more at ease, right? Empathetic, open, soft, at ease. All of that is the result of really taking deeply to heart the truth of dependent origination. That's why our masters, our teachers, lamas emphasize this teaching so much. And the Buddha himself, of course, also emphasized so much that everything is interdependent. Right? He famously stated, we have this, actually we preserve it even, his statement in Tibetan, but we preserve it in Sanskrit, Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava Hetu, and so on. There's this mantra, which is the mantra of causality. It's it's a Buddha's words, where he says that everything arises, right, interdependently, and so on and so forth. We take that mantra, we'll keep it in Sanskrit, Ye Dharma Hetu, we put it even in all the statues. When we feel them, we put it in the stupas. Just, you could see how important that statement, that just teaching on interdependence are.
Tindu ngaranzu tinde di hakoni ngolin chetu baina chigne mise di meaningful se warwa kayasna shivuji jeyor ta ngaranzu la soso la niba chumba ji bala haku kore miyu chumba ji tubala ni ne de ni soso ki mise di yakdu kare chungba ine de la donglen chetu ko ba sumni de ni 인지 민지 차상 소소 삼바나시 둑고고 말해 레니 가르 좀 와이네야 데파 지 나라서 인지kel라이네 지 challenges 는 차상야 opportunity 라파 굿니 아니 소소게 미세데 도토고도 봐 다든주 뭐니 다니기 짜좀뭐 내가 좀 벌어 봐 간소이나다 딩사이나 만드라스기도 와 Miseki, mantra for meaningful life. Ta dordina ngazu misedi flexible shibu jungre, meaningful flexible shibu jung chagre.
So there will be a few really important, great outcomes from us integrating this, teaching this view of interdependence in our life and really taking it to heart, kind of, right? Gaining experience with these teachings. Our life will be meaningful to the point that we will sort of evoke that, we will come to understand all the power, that potential that we all have as humans to really accomplish the important goal that we set out to accomplish, right? It will give us that strength, that kind of appreciation of ourselves to really go on and make our life truly meaningful. It will also, another outcome will be that it will, once we really understand interdependence, it will help us to accept everything that arises in our life, good and bad, right? We'll be willing to make space for accommodate all the good and bad situations in our life. Another outcome is that, we will understand, when we really understand interdependence, that not everything in life is going to happen according to my wish, to my wishes, right? Things will fall apart. Things will not work out at the end. But when we really understand interdependence, we will take those challenges and turn them into opportunities, which is so important, right? It's really crucial, as we these days say a lot, like in English, like, oh, like that's my mantra, right? Outside of Buddhist context, just more like, oh, that's my mantra for happy life. So, well, that's our mantra for our meaningful life, right? The things are interdependent. That will enable us to live this meaningful life, being more flexible and more accepting, more accommodating to everything that befalls us.
당연히 디 가르치는 시고에서나 다른 아주 릭바 세야드 단테와 요바레 된 낭베기 최담지 땡들 임바지 레베기 땡라 팝네 검게여라 몰린지 구거래 낭바지나 아니 이번에 낭바 산제베기 시작이 따와 거랑디 땡중차 되게 요바인디 데라 삼로타야디 내가 시작이여라 아니 도르디나타 테비 셰랍 세디 최담지 땡들 임바기 테비 셰랍기에 대한 남바 산제비기 따와 직차 되게디 안디야 엔게션부지 찌고거라 디나신전에다 가난주 삼바당 곰바얀딜라 따야디 내가 지차 되게래.
So why am I explaining the dependent origination now? Because it's very much connected with this, what is translated as reasoning, right? Studying scriptures and reasoning. So when it comes to wisdom that arises from studying, or studying what? Studying reasoning. Reasoning, what is reasoning? Well, fundamentally, we can say that reasoning comes down to Buddhist reasoning, Buddhist logic, comes down to notion that everything is interdependent, right? And being a Buddhist, we can't help but we'll have to accept that Buddhist truth, that fundamental truth of interdependence of all phenomena. Also, that's what comprises the Buddhist view. View is extremely important to resolve. So in short, really, when it comes to generating, cultivating wisdom, insight that comes from studying, from listening to the teachings, here, when what we study, what we listen to is called reasoning, and we can understand that as the view of interdependence, as the understanding that everything is interdependent, right? And that in itself, that already, if we gain that understanding, right, at that level of just studying and listening, it will help us enormously when we proceed to the next two processes of reflection and then meditation. So the 10 real interdependence cannot be overlooked at this stage of studying Buddhism and Buddhist view.
지당 디 따와당 저여레 땡데디 데니 상이나 영아주 오니 따와 용그레 디디니 지 땡데세디 간데스코와 링고고 여바당 ngaransu mise nangla ani charni nyamlin chiri ani ji contest chigre setting introducing a jealous shamni shugins.
They just said the interdependence very much connected also with Buddhist view, but I'm going to leave it at that point. Well, at this point for now, because actually we'll go into more detail about the Buddhist view as it later on, because that's one of the 5 stages of the path, right? That's coming. And then in the context of then studying what is Buddhist view, I will explain more deeply how to really understand dependent origination, how to practice it, how to gain experience, meditate on it, right? All of that I will explain later when that stage of the path will be explained.
Da niba samjungi shara sayadi da tini tezumgi tripati 좀 연구를 송발해. 다 되봐 제바 짬제기 대좀 마루 러시바레 마도 람상이 시기 말에 라과도 다 취세디 고 사부인디 아주 남기 지 숙다 디로 어제 제바 나신데 제요 말봐. 다 삼중기 셰랍디 딱 가와를 땡고 그래서나 아니 맹아라 땡고 그래서네 송거라 댄사다 어디
Khenpo di chu sabmo res natsu suk ta diro rekja
penangaranzo ngonsumla ta di karbore di nakore sidi tu suguzu에 거 렐라보다 보셔라 봐. 다디 닐로디 거기를 차대디 땡땡 태좀 연거래 assumption 망보여래 연거로 봐.
Next one is the wisdom that is cultivated from reflecting on the Dharma, integrating the Dharma. And what happens is it cuts through doubts. And oh boy, doubts can increase from studying the Dharma. So previously, right, we have been listening to the Dharma. And what happens is that together with the wisdom that comes from listening, also together with that, we can gain even more doubts. We can harbor more doubts. And that's understandable, because what we are really are concerned with here, it's the profound Dharma, profundity of the Dharma. We are not just here to study like sort of forms, their shapes, their colors, like kind of, oh, this is white, this is red, everyone agrees on that, right? Well, everyone can see. No, what we really trying to contemplate and understand and gain experience with is the natural state of phenomena, something that's not that obvious. It's not like being red or yellow, right? And it's something hidden from our sense faculties. And because it is hidden, we have doubts about it. And we have a lot of assumptions about it, because it's not something that we sort of can perceive with our very direct valid cognition. And so it kind of, therefore, brings up a lot of questions. But how is it really? How is that, what's that truth? What's that reality? So to cut through those doubts, we need to reflect. And what we reflect on or contemplate is PIF instructions.
다 맹아 세디 간디질을 쓰기 어려서나 될 지당 지라니여래 지당 제바이나 우바데샤 세디 베나 상계기 툭 저와 전부 랑기 냠용디기 토네 심진 동알레 돌베기 아니 탑 댄샤바 차상라 우바데시 맹아스니 고알린 주고래. 되니 이내양 가수 바바다 단다 제다도 맹아스디 아니 수수기 다 자위 라마 라소베기 되니 수수기 감당 메바당 삼바든수 켐베거니 되니 뉴스 통동지라 책 뉴뉴지게 거니 강에 망보지기 설베게 탑람 숭샤베게 책 된줄라 탑람 된줄라다 가르세 그래서는 맹아스겨래 했으니
Here we contemplate on PIF instructions, and to understand what we mean in Buddhism as these PIF or oral instructions, we need to differentiate between just general understanding, of PIF instructions and more specific than understanding of what is PIF instructions. So in Sanskrit, it's upadesh, right? And in terms of generally speaking, really we can say that whatever the Buddha has spoken out of his really loving, compassionate mind, wisdom mind, right? Whatever methods he had shown in order to guide beings to liberation, all of that is PIF instruction, right? That's oral instruction. It's upadesh, coming from the kind of like loving heart of the Buddha in order to free beings. All his words, upadesh. But also specifically, we have to kind of go away a little bit from that general understanding of oral instructions and say that more specifically, we reflect on oral instructions, PIF instructions given by our own personal root teacher, what we call root guru, the one who knows our mindset, our personality, our interest, our predisposition, right? Someone who really intimately aware of how we personally are, and then gives specifically to us an instruction. And perhaps it's always the PIF instruction is really short. It's not like a very elaborate, long teaching or explanation. It's just few words that strike right to the point of the matter, so we can apply it in a very easy way. And nevertheless, as the result, it's going to clear away a whole lot of our confusion, right? So those few words that have that power to really guide us and help us, given by our own personal root teacher, we call those oral instructions.
디인도다 삼중기 셰랍도 야고 저랑귤레 깨버 제발라 질 라마당 락바르도다 대과 첨보 동아 송죽 딘데기 엔다 수수 자위 라마 딘조더니 띵고거래 담가디 자위 라마를 슈고 요바인데 드니 드니 수수응은인다 메그 당난데서 내가 좀 보시부지래 메그 당난메나 아니 담가기 리시버디 메바로 차로도 봐
To meditate, to reflect, let's stick to the word, yes, contemplate on oral instructions, well, we need to receive from our own root teacher, kind of these oral instructions on the Mahayana specifically in our context, right, on the teachings of sutras and tantras of the great vehicle. And then we can contemplate then on those. But what is required from our own side is to receive those oral instruction with devotion, with trust and faith. If from our side we have no this kind of interest, sincere, genuine interest and faith in the teacher and the teachings, it's like not having a receiver, right? The teacher could give us oral instruction, but we won't really receive those from our own end.
다드니 내가 전부 찍디 대값을라 지당 삼바세 찍디여레 삼중기 셰라우스네 삼로 땅바 디안레 이니양 개 전부 찍디다 삼중기 셰랍세 되지 삼로 망보 지땅닝 아주 지 가르서 거래 kapkala nganzu puzzle ki pieces mangpo do chiyo ba na ta ti chu ya ji digela samlo mangpo tangirwa tende ra segi yo mare samjung gi sherab se ti tor du shana tebe sherab ki tenla pabsha be ki tanda ti gowa samji kala masha ba cheni ani susu gowa di tebe tanda di semla chane bejo tangni ani nyongwe ka kangla leptu ba chi cheba ina ta dela tini samjung gi sherab se ki re sini ta di nya chimbo chire to ba.
A very important point about the second type of wisdom is the understanding of this word contemplation, reflection. Because really, if we think about Tibetan, the wisdom that comes from contemplation, the word here is the same basically as the word that we use to think, right? We just put it in English a bit fancy with contemplation, but generally Tibetan, it's directly meaning to think. Wisdom that comes from thinking, how to understand that. Really, it's not the kind of thinking when we look at the pieces of puzzle, a very big puzzle, and there are many, right, those pieces of puzzle, and we think where will it all get together, and we're thinking, not that, right? Not that kind of thinking that we are talking about here. Well, in short, we need to really understand, right? And not just to know that word, but really understand what is this wisdom? What is that inside? Well, to understand it, let's give it a definition. So the wisdom that comes from contemplation is really the wisdom that arises from us taking the meaning of what have been previously asserted with the wisdom that comes from studying, right? Taking that knowledge that we have gained from studying and not leaving it as a mere theory, but really applying it in our lives, taking it to heart. In other words, assimilating it with with ourselves, taking it to to our being and gaining experience. And that, then, as the result of all of that, we call the wisdom that comes from contemplation. So contemplation could be misleading, right, as a word. Really, we need to understand here that what we are talking about is really integrating, assimilating, experiencing the meaning that we have previously understood.
Ni kazan shi nganzu chi kap la inchi ke la ina ko chu ba cham ji mai ba chini you have to feel it sigirwa o tinde ki chowa chi lepto ba ji la go go re samjung shi ra.
Right. In English, it's as I have already mentioned in the previous Dharma sessions, it's nice. In English, you really sometimes say, well, you don't just understand it, really feel it. In Tibetan, perhaps there's no such way to put it so neatly, but that's exactly what this wisdom really refers to. Don't just understand things, really feel them.
Teni tape che ken namba tingi yena mena kanshi nganzu tezum de sewar che bala lela ba yamare sanje ki kada tenje tenzu gyachambore sanje ki kansa kwangbo rimba mangbo la gongni dangde nge tu teba rimba mangbo sun sha tu tenzu chasang lobjo chang de tende tezum mangbo yongre yine yang da samjung gi shirap yang da ba gyula ke bar che bala khasang ti tablam ji sung swa gari sung du sena temba shi se del tini del to ku gres kansa la mi tun chela tun che de yang chi la mi tun den la tun den de yang dang dun la mi tun nge dun la tun nge dun de yang tini nam shi dan yi shi ni ye ben nan yi shi la tun ku go re se ka da di yan den de ki nyongwa yang da ba shi rang gyula ke bar che bala temba shi la tini tini 저나 마늘 마트바야 야고치용 그래 했으니 된소에 송송아 가자.
I don't know if you remember from the previous sessions when we have been discussing in more detail this second type of wisdom, I already mentioned that it's not that easy to get rid of all these doubts. And also it's not easy to integrate the teachings, not for least because they are extremely vast and elaborate. And what we need to really contemplate and understand, the Dharma is very profound. There are different vehicles, different stages of the Dharma that we call vehicles. We have the meanings that are to be taken literally, and some that are just provisional stepping stones, are not really to be taken at face value. Then how to understand, which Dharma is what and which vehicle? Well, it could be very difficult to orient oneself in that kind of vastness or profundity of the Dharma. So I have given you a method. Don't know if you remember, but really what will help us to unmistakably really proceed and to gain that kind of experiential knowledge of the Dharma is to orient ourselves by relying on these 4 statements given by the Buddha. The 4 statements, which are as following. Do not rely on a person, but rely on the teachings given by that person. Do not rely on the words of the teachings, but rely on the real meaning of the teachings. Do not rely on the provisional, temporary meaning of the teachings, but rely on the ultimate, definitive meaning of the teachings. And lastly, do not rely on your conceptual mind, but rely on wakefulness and conceptual wakefulness. So if we will remember this, we will kind of 4 reliances, then it will help us to really unmistakably and kind of sort of proceed with all these different points of view and different subjects and vehicles of the Dharma.
라서 다더니 숨바 검중기 시랍세디다 가상한수 쪼디 니라고지 자원낭라 검중외기 내룩 지신세스리다 딘데기 뇨와디 곰고 그랬으니 다 뇨와디 똑발라파 니 그러고 그래 되니 데라 던다 쪼디 니여래 곰세제당 니룩세다 가리 곰고여서는 니룩 곰고여래스디
And we continue with the 3rd final wisdom, the one that arises from meditation. Here again, we gain our understanding of what is that wisdom from the Karmapas, 3rd Karmapas, Mahamudra Aspiration Prayer, where it is said that we meditate on natural state, we meditate on natural state just as it is, kind of eliminating that natural state as it is. So here, when we come to the practice of meditation, we need to meditate on the experience gained previously, that contemplation, that wisdom, we call it experience, and we meditate on it so that that experience is transformed into stable realization. So we take that experience, we meditate on it, and as a result it becomes that what we call realization. So here there are 2 important terms that I have spent some time discussing, the natural state and meditation, So meditate on what? On the natural state.
다 단다가수 바바 라 곰세디 고대오지는 칭윤윤 제바이나 다단예 삼중기 셰랍라 땐니 중샤베기 뇽와저와 니시저와 디 강라 땐니 냠바르샤바텔라 곰세여다 가수바베기 림바타도 제디
To explain is meditation, that process, in a very easy to understand way, I will say that Well, what happens here is we take that experience that we have gained previously with our practice, with our process of contemplation, assimilation of the teachings, that we take that experience, which is certainty, right? Because now we have no doubts. So we take that certainty, that experience, and we just rest our mind in it. We let our mind rest, really, let it be in that certainty, in that experience.
다 냠버 샤스에 지당 곰라 시겨래. 이내야 치코랑데 니버 좀 보셔래. 다디 인질라 다다 용기에메 네 하고 마소. 아주 냠버 샤스디 냠세디 최종 토멘 상인로 봐. 아주 냠세디 그 찍바세요 봐. 찍바. 제 코랑 니루 카레 임바티 강라 샤바 짬마도 데지 망도 땅니 쇠샤야당 뇽도 땅샤야다보당 덴데 짜니 메바치니 그랑 간데 임발라 임뱅앙라 균짱바들라티니 가수바베기 냠바르샤스 딘디 베바기 냠세 칡들라 쮸바당 달와 당아주 남주 곰기티니 균르와 조 마임바 꾸라데바 마임바 다 데니가 기 견레 파 데베 칸에 데고 그래 샤고 그래 세 데기지 고와다오지 멘도 덴데지 녀바시 용고도 와색디가
Tamadi kurtebdan jotok mepe
꾸데다 저도 니가 데베 코네 아니 데가나 샤고 그래 세지 당아주 인지kel라 에너지 no more, no less 세워봐.
So when I say resting in that experience, in that certainty, let be into it. I use a specific term in Tibetan, and I'm absolutely not sure if it's rendered well in English. So let me give you feeling for that term in Tibetan, right? So it's not just meditate. Well, we say that, but what does meditate mean, right? We need to really get that kind of feeling of that term specifically. So in Tibetan, we say nyamparshak, rest in equipoise, rest in meditative equipoise. So we need to rest in that meditative equipoise on experience and certainty. So what is equipoise? Literally, the Tibetan term means just equality, sameness. It means that something remains the same and it's not being improved, not being reduced, it's not being made bigger, or it's not being made smaller, not decreasing, not increasing, remaining the same. This word same is very important here for the practice of meditation. So we say equipoise, but literally same. How to translate that now into our practice? So when we rest in that experience that we have gained previously, we need to rest in it without trying to make it into something that it's not. As Khenpo said also now in English, no more, no less. Not to try to increase it, make it more. Don't try to decrease it by making it less, right? Just without altering it, just let it be as it is. So this term same is really powerful if you really take it and understand what it's meant by it is just to be the same. Don't try to make it into anything it's not. And that really means a state of simplicity, state that is free from all these kind of complexities of exaggerating things or denigrating things, right? Saying something is there that's not, or denying something that's there. Without all of that, just let it be as it is, no more, no less. That's what we mean by nyamshak, resting in that meditative equipoise.
That digi tundadi tozo godevati sebudi tandangazu woni yungre chajimulam nala kongi sebu sungore din sheba kanki tsumbame diminish che kanki kakwa mes ngeden de shuyedi di re se ji cha sona di chomba cha bare di doto bare kerang sö bare mor chagdo wa dimin di mare se ji tha che sha ba na di nganzu kak bare de la kurwa de ba se gore the less cha ro gore de niga maim be ji kan la sha to ba na tini lode ani chunyi kan la nyam par sha ba sene ta ti ton ta de dire sik de won yung do ba
To make it a bit more comprehensive, what I just said, we can look at what the third Karmapa himself stated in the Mahmud Respiration prayer in his verse 12. Well, he just said, it cannot be shown by saying this is it. It cannot be refuted by saying this is not it. So again, this is what we mean by exaggerating and denigrating. When we meditate on it, not trying to affirm it and say this is it, this is the one, right? That's kind of making it more, because now we had something and we're trying to add something to it, like by pointing finger and making some label to it, right? But also we shouldn't be refuting it by saying this is not it. Then we go into another scenario of denigrating and making it less, right? Again, there's something there and we're trying to reduce it. So just don't do any of that affirmation, negation. Just rest, as the Karmapa continues, rest in that unconditioned dharmata, natural state, which is beyond conceptual mind. Right? That's in essence then what we mean by resting meditative equipoise.
teni da gom sedi nganzu gomri che pa chela sigore teni ngaransu semki yundingi cha kongbel do toba tang kyöngi cha di ma nyungro towa la gomri che be ke tablam de la chidang ke je pa na broadly speaking ani gom sedi sigores.
But here please understand that there's also another much more broader picture of using a term just meditate. Now we were speaking about nyamshak, right? Resting in the natural state, in that equipoise, so without adding, reducing. But when we just speak of word meditation in the sense of habituating ourselves to something, right? In that context, in a very broad sense, we do try to, what we do in meditation is we habituate ourselves to our good qualities, positive sides of our mind, and strengthening them. So here there is increasement, and trying to reduce the negative, difficult, disturbing sides, aspects, let's say, of our mind, right? So there is some kind of a process of improving, negating. It's a different term, right? It's what we translate as habituation, and it's a really much more broader sense of practice of meditation.
Dan eluk se tila ani chidang lam ke kapla tine nganzu langja kare yimba torja kare yimba tenzula samlo yakbotane ngishe kene hagwe cheba dia lam ke kap nelu chire ta thardu la samlo tangba inani tini nelu se tila ngarangzu kasu baba ta chage chemba kausula tini lyunga po nelu ta semga po nelus.
And now quickly about the natural state, right? That was for the word meditation. Natural state, again, we can give a very broad understanding of natural state by just saying that, well, basically, when we have certainty about what is good, what to accept, what is bad for us, what to reject, right? That kind of certainty is to know how things are. Oh, this is good, this is bad, right? That's also called natural state, kind of nature of things, but it's relative. If we really go into ultimate sense of the word, and that's what we are concerned with here, because, well, we are looking at the Mahamudra path, right? So going then deeper, going for the ultimate meaning of the natural state, then we are concerned with the true natural state of the body and the mind, how they are ultimately.
Dini 당한수 차생 냠린 제베 값을라 다들 ngadan 되바래 류응의베게 내루 네도 눈 뭐시에 짤종는 네도 눈니 아니 델라 템베게 셈의베게 내루디 원도 그래게 탑람되는 순거열에 제자 아니 류응의베 내루당 셈의베 내루 니가디 냠수 냠린 제게열에스.
In the Mahamudra, why do we speak about the nature of body and mind? Because in Mahamudra, we have to go into very more tantric teachings, right? We're not anymore on the sutric level. And in the tantras, they differentiate body and mind because the method is to recognize the essential points of the body, of the subtle body, and use them so that by striking those essential points of the subtle body, we can reveal the wisdom that dwells in our mind. So you see there's a separation by working with the subtle body and by striking those points, kind of manifesting that wisdom mind.
다치당 셈의베 내루디 가르레스니 태가르케제 디니 태갈 랭자바이나 셈의베 내루디 살동 순주레스 렌디 용거래 얘네한다 디 살동 순주레 라바 잠지 디게요 말아 워나 간데세다 텐데 살동 순주기 셈의베 내루디 냠렌제고 그래 세용디 되니 가상의 산지기 실싱 도나라 칙 셈라 셈마치디 셈이라신 거사와 세디 낭라 되니 추 태과 숨당 동하던 집에 된다기 림바디 창대열에 셈라 세디 나와 셈이 망고시 셈마치디 세디 셈동바임바 아니 셈이라신 거사와 세디 살동 송주임바 된대지니더니 만주 냠린치니 도구거래 되니 단다 슝코라나라야 가상의 지지 니슈임바 tawa tenla pabe kapsula ani kande yimbatang di kombeke nyamsu lembe kapsula kandis nyamsu lingu gre se tsikje ta te di nganzu nyamlen chasangki framework ta wachi shane ani lobjong changba inere nyamlen cheparan tu strotu baina korimdi tata ajire gre.
If we ask what is the nature of mind, a very direct, straightforward answer will be it's the union of clarity and emptiness. But that's kind of, we can't leave it there, really. Oh, okay, unity of clarity and emptiness, but then how can we really practice that? What are the steps to reveal that true nature of our minds? If we ask, I had explained it in quite in great detail in the previous Dharma sessions by quoting the Buddha himself, who said in the Prajnaparamita that as for the mind, there is no mind. The nature of the mind is luminosity. So here, from this statement, we can identify 3 stages, 3 steps towards revealing, manifesting the true nature of our mind. Khenpo just went blind. So the 3 stages, the one when the Buddha said, as for the mind, well, there we need to understand that all appearances are the mind, right? All appearances are the illusory display of the mind. That's the first stage. When the Buddha said there is no mind, there we need to understand that the mind itself, in its essence, is emptiness, not truly existent. And when the Buddha says the true nature of the mind is luminosity, then here exactly then we arrive at that final stage of the unity of clarity and emptiness. Luminosity means unity of clarity and emptiness, right? So we reach there by following gradually these practices. That's by looking at what the Buddha said. But we also looked at how Karmapa, the 3rd Karmapa, specifically in the Mahamudra Inspiration prayer, explained and how to meditate on that nature of the mind. Not only how to meditate, first how to identify it as just as the view, what is the nature of the mind, resolving it at the level of the view, And that was one verse that I explained already. And then we looked at, okay, then we take that view and how can we sustain it in our practice of meditation? And there was another verse from the third Karmapa, right? So we also looked at the Mahmud respiration prayer and saw that really these few verses give us the whole framework of the whole path to realize the nature of the mind. It's all right there, step by step, right? We can reach to that realization of the unity of clarity and emptiness.
Then Anzuki Lobjong Jangi Nyamlin Chigi the Rimba Sumbujdo, Dinang La Pa, look to buy na, and Tata Rigri.
Whatever we study or practice in Buddhism, we can connect it, with these 3 stages, right? Really, like what the Buddha said, like everything then can be related back to these 3 stages, everything that can be connected with those 3 steps. It will be really helpful for us to have that kind of guidelines, right, when we study and practice.
Then the Sig the Lola Sumni, Anzu Gurbaine, Pain Chumbo Yungri, Tingidu, Semla Semachi, the Sem Generation Wasawa said the Narangi GBS in Samni.
That's why I think it's really great if we can memorize this statement from the Prajna Paramitas and just recite it. Well, memorize it's not hard, and by reciting it over and over again in our lives. As for the mind, there is no mind. The nature of the mind is luminosity. Like recite it at all the different times because that's your GPS.
Then that Sem Nubin Lukordi, Nazu Gyud Lama the Shung Chasang di, then Karishigi race and Kizdi Baina, Sem Nubin Nilukole Shigi race and Lendi Gamna Digger, the Indutaki number Sangin Nani, Jema Kalegale Sibaina, Gyud Lama the Sem Nubin Niludi, Pedang, Lungrik Pamangbochi Konitini, Deshe Capsha Peki Shunjiri, Tandati Karesina, Sem Nubin Niluk Sanjeki. Semge Ranshin Wesabawa says Sumudo, that did is Gapure.
And actually, the Gyud Lama treatise, the Uttara Tantra Shastra, deals exactly with this topic. The last one, the natural state of the mind. Right? We kind of reach that, and it's the nature of the mind. And so later, when you slowly look and kind of study the Uttara Tantra Shastra, you can see that everything there points out to that unity of clarity and emptiness, that nature of the mind, luminosity. It explains it by means of giving different examples, reasoning, statements, but really it basically the main subject matter is that the luminous nature of the mind.
That the Nani, the kitchen put chick, the Chigure, that the K Ingila, Yeneme, Della Salcha Chiame, Shawar Java, Junseme, Yanda, Nila Yanda, Yanda, Tona number 12 said that did 6 in Nangla, Sim a bit Nilu, the kind of number shot on the Cebu Sunshire. Gyud Lama ke tunda chasang de yang zu dordina de tsiji de nang la du de gore.
And again, if I just to quote the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the Sublime Continuum, there's this one verse there that explains that everything about this luminous nature of the mind and how to meditate on it. So the verse goes as following. It says, "In this, there is not a thing to be removed, nor the slightest thing to be added. It is looking perfectly into reality itself, and when reality is seen, complete liberation." Right? There's nothing to be removed from it. There's nothing to be added. It's just perfectly looking at it as it is. And when it's seen, that is liberation.
Tsiji de nang la Gyud Lama ke tendun chasang de chang de yores.
the whole subject, well, we can say the whole topic, subject matter of Uttaratantra Shastra is condensed in these 4 lines.
Laso, tininta, anzu, nipa lam toje sherab number sumbu korla, shu simba yins.
And in this way, we have finished the second stage of the path, the one that was explaining the 3 types of wisdom that enable us then to realize the path, or proceed on the path.
Janju semju rimbo anche, magye panam ki gyurenche, geba nyambara meba yang, gone gondun pelabare sho.